Hi, everybody. Um, Very welcome to this UFI webinar. Let me just check that my slides are working okay here. So this webinar is about simple techniques to improve visuals in online learning. And essentially, in the last, I'd say, let's see, since 2013, I've been on a journey with visuals. I'd like to share some of that journey with you this morning, if that's okay. But because my background isn't in visual anything, I don't have a graphic design degree. I didn't go to art school. I'm a software engineer by background, and I've done a lot of work in FE too, and worked for City and Guilds for quite a while. And but a few years ago, I started to draw. I suppose I started to learn how to draw, all accidentally. And now everything that I do is of a visual nature. And I thought I'd share some of the things that I have learned, and hopefully you can apply it to some of the things that you create as well. So let's see, to give you an idea, yeah, this is what I find myself doing quite a lot for various different clients, is visual translation. It's taking spoken word, it's taking written word, and trying to find out elements that would make good visuals. Okay, so my favorite way of doing this is getting people together and have dialogue. Okay, if you've read anything about Paulo Freire's sort of pedagogy of the oppressed, he talks about there's already knowledge in the room. Bring it together and share each other's knowledge, and I love that. And so anybody that I'm working with, I like to have dialogue. I like to listen and tune into what it is they're saying, and I find that when they speak about stuff, they use metaphors, so they give away little clues as to what the visuals could be. They also, whenever you're talking about stuff, you make it personal, usually, if you're not reading from a script. So you wrap yourself into it and your humor into it as well. So I'm like this sort of crazy machine that I've drawn here. And you see all of my slides today are black and white slides, and really that's intentional. I'm trying to sort of say to you, hey, look, even just with black pen on white paper, this is possible. So let's see. This is an example of something I created quite a few years ago. In fact, I remember exactly the time I created this. My second son was ill from school, so he was off from school, and I was looking after him, and he was watching something on the computer or something like that, and somebody had sent me a video of Dylan William talking about creativity in schools. And there was just a bit, just in terms of how he was talking about it, there was a bit that just really struck me. And I don't know, I just sort of grabbed that and started playing about with it on paper. What does that look like? What's he trying to say? What is the purpose of school? Right. So it's arming our young people with the ability to think rather than the ability to regurgitate. And I suppose that resonates with me in terms of my own educational journey, right? But over 1 million people have seen this image, and I know that over 1 million people have seen it because, having shared it on social media, there's various things that you can see the tracking, I suppose, of how many people see it and resonate with it or retweet it. And obviously, if organizations with very wide networks get a hold of stuff that is meaningful to their network, then they reshare it too. So, but that really encouraged me as an amateur drawer, as it were, to realize that actually things that I find meaningful can be meaningful to other people. And maybe I would create this in a way that nobody else would, because there's only one me. And I'd really like you to think about that, and realize that actually you are a unique product of experience. And therefore things that appear obvious to you aren't necessarily obvious to other people. Whenever I I spoke to a friend of mine, Maren Deepwell, about I'm doing this webinar for UFI. How do you think I should approach that? She immediately came back and said, well, look, there's an image I use of yours all the time, and it's that sort of meeting around a document. And again, I remember having this thought too. I was trying to talk to people about why it's different collaborating around a Google Doc than it is having a meeting. And it's not that one replaces the other, but it's very different. But why is it different? And it's like, well, actually, you can work in parallel whenever you're meeting around a document, and you can see what other people are doing. Of course, we're having to do a lot more of that sort of meeting these days in the new normal, I suppose. But this image, obviously, I created that years ago. I'd completely forgotten about it, but someone else is still using it because it's meaningful, and the style of it, because it's hand drawn, and I wouldn't draw it like this now. My skills have improved, you'll be glad to hear. But I wouldn't draw it like this now, and yet there's something about it that is, because it is hand drawn, it's genuine. It's real. It's not made by a computer. And I think that also has value. Here's another little graphic I did, again, working with an organization called Break Free from Plastic. And again, I use the same sort of method of, let's get people together and listen to them, tune into what they're saying. But there's another element of play here, and it's humor. So even something that's, I think, is tragic in regards to how we treat our planet, there's still a place for humor, because humor disarms. Humor allows people to accept the things that you create. So yeah, just the eye of that turtle still makes me chortle slightly, and look, here is a graph. It's still a graph, but the graph is telling a story. I've made it tell a story, and it's still it's pretty basic, I suppose. And lastly, just in terms of showing you some of the things I've created, because we're going to actually get on and have a go at some things. I promised this would be practical, so there's going to be some practical elements to it as well. So I hope you've brought a pen and a piece of paper, and that you're willing to give it a go. And the beautiful thing about having a webinar is no one else will get to see what you create. You're able to create it, and if it doesn't quite work out, that's okay. In fact, a lot of this is about getting over yourself and not worrying about what other people think, which is I suppose, is a lesson in life I've really had to wrestle with. Anyway, but this is one I created very recently. Let's see, maybe a couple of weeks ago, Mozilla sent out an email about how to make Zoom meetings more private. And there was a whole list of things that, I think there's sort of eight things that you could do to make your Zoom meetings more private. And I thought, well, why isn't that visualized in some way? Why, and therefore I started to translate it into something that could be meaningful as a single entity, but that would still recognize where the knowledge came from. So I'm not trying to pretend that this came from me. I'm pointing to Mozilla, and you see the line at the bottom there. And in terms of how that graphic's used, it'll also link to the stuff that Mozilla has sent out. So in some ways, make it stronger, or make it wider, allow more people to access it. And I suppose a lot of this is about accessibility. So why bother? Why bother trying to sort of create more visuals, or making your the stuff that you're presenting, or that you're using to train, or that you're using to guide other people? Why make it more visual? Well, we have this saying: a picture tells 1,000 words, or a picture says 1,000 words. And that's all very well, but what 1,000 words is it saying? Even I drew this in just a few seconds, really, but it already, just even the style of the frame around the outside, you know what I mean? It's almost like a little bit of an art gallery. It's all, I'm saying things that are not necessarily explicit, but they're implicit. And there's as many, you can wrap as many intentional things into an image as you can unintentional things as well. So, but also I think to the other point here, an image is a hook. You know, whenever I read the newspaper or pretend to read the newspaper, usually I'm skipping to the puzzles at the back. But whenever I read newspaper, I'm taken in by the imagery. I guess most people are, and that's the thing then that dictates what you'll read and maybe what you'll skip over or what you'll skim. So images as hooks, I think, are really important. And of course, you go to social media and you will see images as hooks, you know, everywhere. You know, all social media platforms have enabled images sort of front and center to be able to drag people into what it is they're talking about or preaching about or selling or advertising or whatever. So images as hooks, I think, are really key. And of course, there's lots of different types of sort of visuals that you can think about here. So I'm going to talk a lot about drawing. But there's also photography. You know, you could use stock photography, and again, that's something with as the web has got bigger and bigger. You know, there's millions and millions of images that are available to you for free that you can use, and you'll see as well, just in this image that I created. I went to Unsplash. Oh, by the way, I'll have lots of links at the end for some of the things that I reference here. So, but Unsplash has a gazillion images in it that you could use. And I typed in student, and one of the images, here's one of the images. Now, tricky thing about stock photography is that it doesn't, for me, it doesn't really hit the mark. Now, it's better than nothing. You know, it's still better than just a page of text or paragraph of text. But who is this person? Well, you know, for starters, looks like a guy. You know, does the person have the same ethnicity as the people I'm trying to reach? Is that important? You know, is a person on a Mac laptop? You know, probably a $2,000 laptop. Is that the same image as the students maybe that I'm trying to reach? Maybe it is. You know, maybe it's not. But my point here is that you can definitely get hooks, but are they the right hooks? Are they what are they actually saying, both explicitly and implicitly? So stock photography is definitely can be extremely useful. Memes, I mentioned before, I have 3 kids, and I chatted to them before this webinar about memes, and they basically said, Dad, if you used memes, that would be totally cringeworthy. You know what I mean? As in a teaching context, none of our teachers would use memes. But my point here is, stand in the shoes of your audience, see it from their perspective, and understand what's going to be meaningful to them. And look, it might be cringy, but that might be the intention. Cringy is still engaging, if you know what I mean. And sure enough, whenever I did a search for memes, I came across this, obviously this classic meme of the Lord of the Rings. One does not simply move a course online, and that probably resonates with quite a lot of you, I'm sure. And then there's the GIF, and GIF is, I find, really interesting, because just a little bit of repeating video can go a long way and can somehow capture an emotion in a way that a static image can't. Now, creating a GIF or capturing a GIF is another thing, and there's a little bit of an art to it, but you might find that as you progress on your visual journey, you start to get curious about GIFs, and that you're able to not only use them, but also create your own. There's a great little program called Giphy that will essentially allow you to create a little GIF from other material. So from taking a piece of video and just taking a slice of it, because that will mean stuff to other people. Now, obviously, this is a Simpsons GIF, so you're already sort of appealing to maybe people who would sort of understand or recognize that that program. So if you used to say a Star Wars GIF, then obviously you would be appealing to people who maybe like Star Wars. But then might you be turning off a whole load of people who have no interest in Star Wars whatsoever? Either way, know your audience. Step inside their shoes, have a look around and think what's meaningful to them, what's going to work for them, and what's going to engage them and disarm them. Or is it going to feel like school and feel like words and feel like something that's sometimes quite oppressive? Just a quick note on Creative Commons. I came across Creative Commons maybe back in 2010 or 2011. I've been around a long time before that. But Creative Commons has played a really important part in my journey. And if you haven't come across it, what Creative Commons allows you to do is to license your work so that other people can use it for free under certain terms. So you can basically say, well, look, I've created this artwork. You can use it for free as long as you recognize me, attribute me, point back to me, okay? Sometimes, most of the artwork I create, I also have what's called a no derivatives license. So basically what that means is I don't want you to change the artwork. I don't want you to put your logo on my artwork, okay? But also I don't want you to change its meaning somehow. That said, I've produced a lot of artwork that I've released under a share-alike license, which means, hey, you can actually release this as long as you release it under the same license as I've released it to you. Then that's okay. But essentially, it allows you to do something I think better than copyright, which is to get recognition for your insight, but also to go wide, is the term I would use. So to allow people to take value from the thing that you've created, okay? So you'll see at the bottom, let's see, here's one here. You'll see at the bottom of this, a sort of a correct attribution, right? So this is just a little cartoon that I did. Again, I was thinking to myself about how easy it is to get caught on mute in an online meeting and almost have a rant. You know, and someone's like, Bob, you're on mute. But you'll see this, it's sort of correctly attributed at the bottom. So Bob by Visual Thinkery is licensed under CC BY ND. And it's as easy as that. But that essentially, the Bob and the Visual Thinkery, that links back to me, the creator. And I'm saying to anybody in the world, you can use this image I've created as long as you point back to me. So I think it's definitely worth considering. But if you haven't, if you're not aware of Creative Commons, it's definitely worth looking into if you're creating anything really, then putting it out there. Another thing I want you to think about is aesthetic. And again, I've learned a lot about aesthetic over the last few years. How does something feel? Because whenever you look at something visual, you absorb. Since you were born, you have been absorbing information, okay? And how something feels has already been absorbed way before you've read any a title or read any words associated with it, which is why sort of typography and the use of fonts is so important. And obviously, if you, my wife's a primary school teacher, and her use of Comic Sans she uses that quite a lot, and that's intentional because it feels like friendly learning. Comic Sans, I suppose, love it or loathe it, to a certain age group, I suppose. It might feel oppressive to a different age group, but it's important to recognize what aesthetic is and the aesthetic of something that you're putting out. Does it feel like it's made by a computer? Because that's important. If you create something in, say, Microsoft Word and show it to somebody else, they'll be able to. What program was this made in? Microsoft Word. I know that font. Of course you do, because the default fonts are so widely used. Okay, but so does it feel like it's for somebody else? As in, whenever I read, and I hardly ever read any academic journals, right? But if I read an academic paper, this is written for somebody else. It's not written for me. There are no images. It's written in a language and in a font. You know what I mean? A sort of a legal Times New Roman font. It's unfriendly. It's not written for me. Whether that might be intentional or not, I don't know. But it's there. Maybe it's made to suit the instructor. I think so much of the things we create are made around the assessment process as opposed to the learning process. Does it feel like school? And again, that might be intentional, but I think for a lot of students, especially in FE, I think we would want to get away from that aesthetic. But how could it feel? You know, could it feel funny? Again, that's both a blessing and a curse sometimes. Could it feel friendly? Again, I'd say that's a strength in terms of someone being disarmed to the learning. Could it feel easy? And again, sometimes that's quite useful at the start, but can also pose a problem as you go on, I suppose. But one of the real strengths of sort of hand-drawn stuff is that it feels genuine, right? Because it feels hand-drawn, and I use that all the time. You know, essentially all of my work is hand-drawn, but it feels genuine. So consider aesthetic. Another thing I want to just point out as well, I spoke about it earlier, but is the importance of humor. And this was just, again, I have imitated, you know, many different sort of artists or creators, I suppose, and horrible histories. I just think is fantastic, and in like the videos are brilliant, absolutely brilliant. They seem to cut across different age groups and make history accessible, right? And if you ask why is that, and I suppose I'm thinking about the books now. You know, there's the perfect mix of knowledge, because it's just packed with knowledge, you know, stuff that you didn't know. It's very visual, so lots of little cartoon strips, or in the front of the books there's like my littlest is doing lots of Roman stuff at the moment. I keep pointing out that I'm a Celt, by the way, but you know, just lots of visual, there's like a Roman in the front going and saying some funny thing. There's a lot of dad humor in there too, I think. But there's lots of humor, and the humor disarms, and suddenly the knowledge seems much more accessible. And I'd really encourage you to experiment with, you know, involving your humor in your creations as well. But listen, hey, look, one of the biggest barriers I have found whenever I talk to people and they say, oh, so, you know, how long have you been? And I'm like, well, it's only been a few years that I've been drawing and whatnot. And they say, oh, I'm not creative, you know. And it's sort of like how they talk about maths, you know what I mean? It's oh yes, I was never good at maths. And it was almost as if there was a decision made at some point in their journey, you know, maybe around, it's probably sort of at the end of primary school, going into secondary school, that sort of time, when you decide stuff about yourself and you decide, I am not good at maths, or I am not creative. And I think that's a great shame, because you'll also be aware of the sort of growth mindset sort of ideology, you know, where you know, you might not consider yourself creative, but you can become more creative. You're not creative yet. I think is quite important, but I think this is the big barrier, and it was the big barrier in my journey too, because I did not see myself. It took me years where I saw myself as an artist, but I did not see myself. I saw myself as curious. I saw myself as someone who experimented with stuff, especially technology. But and I would have maybe described myself as creative, but somebody who could draw, not really. But yet I always sort of thought in space, you know what I mean? I always sort of, when I was designing a computer program, I would think in boxes and that sort of stuff. So there were definitely clues there, but there's part of this is getting over yourself and having a go. You know, again, primary school kids are brilliant at this, as in and as soon as we become self-aware, it becomes a real problem. I'm sure you already know this as educators, you'll be well aware. But here's 3 golden rules, again, off the top of my head, so maybe they're not that golden, but they're 3 rules anyway. I think this is about practice. I think again, we in FE know, it's mostly about skill. So I say 99% skill. That seems a bit maybe arbitrary, but it feels that way. It feels like if you do something every day, you can't fail but get better at it, right? I think the hardest step is the first one. I think actually getting started and saying, I'm going to give this a crack, is the hardest step. And the other real rule is be careful who you compare yourself against, especially if you're, as I've encouraged you to imitate. One of the artists that I just have imitated a lot from is a children's author, a children's artist author called Oliver Jeffers, who's also from my neck of the woods, sort of near Belfast. And but I just find how he captures characters and how the light and shadows and whatever, it's just delicious. And I have I've imitated a lot of that, but I'm a fool if I compare myself to him, who has been, creating that sort of stuff for decades. That's not an unfair that's not a fair comparison at all. So even whenever you see something on social media, it's really easy to go, oh, I'm not as good as that. I can't do that. It's really super easy. And beware of that. It won't help you. And you'll be surprised if you do share stuff on social media. Again, social media is a really important part of my journey, that actually people will either ignore what you put out there, or it will resonate with them and they'll let you know. And they'll say, oh, I like that. And you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised at something that you create quite quickly and put out there. Someone will get value from that. And so social media was a great encouragement to me right in the early days that actually I should do more of this. My thoughts have value to other people. That's really encouraging. But what should you draw? This is the other thing. To be presented with a blank piece of paper is daunting. And as I said before, I use dialogue as a way of, I'll often record the dialogue and then go back through it and harvest it for little insights and clues. Words, as in if someone has written a blog post, if someone's written I find that a politician's speech is often very sterile. There's often really nothing in there. Whereas if you get someone who's maybe written a blog post and it's very much themselves, there's usually quite a lot of stuff in there that can be sort of brought to life. But another thing I use all the time is the web, and Google Images in particular. So if I'm thinking about, especially if something is abstract, think about digital transformation. How do I represent that in an image? I'll put it into Google Images and I'll see what others have created, and I'll see if there's any little clues there of little ideas I can maybe put together to be able to create something. But what comes out can be in lots of different forms. So mind mapping, which I'll talk about later, is, I wish I knew about mind mapping whenever I was going through my educational journey, because I never really came across it properly until my 30s, and then I was asking a computer to do the mind mapping for it. I was typing bits of text in there. I'm not saying that doesn't have value, it definitely does. But in terms of thinking spatially, having a blank piece of paper, rather than being forced to start at the top on a lined piece of paper and organize your thoughts to the bottom, that's oppressive. Start in the middle of a bit of paper and work out. It has revolutionized how I think. I've also learned a lot from cartoons. I wasn't really into cartoons that much as a young person, but there's so much you can communicate in a little 3-panel black and white cartoon. Seriously, Horrible Histories have really nailed this, And then there's the illustration. There's the other category of, I don't know what this is, but it has meaning. I'm trying to capture something. Is it artwork? Might be, but it's sort of trying to say something. And I showed you a few of those earlier. Right, let's actually do something here, and hopefully this will work. I've got 2 exercises that I'm going to take you through, and if you've got a pen and piece of paper handy, then I would really encourage you to have a go. I'm also armed with my document camera. So if I can show you this, this is a very useful piece of kit. Okay, essentially it's a glorified webcam, but it's like on a little angle poise, and it just sort of sits above my piece of paper here. So I've got a piece of paper. Let me just see if I can. I'll instead of sharing my slides, I'll just switch to the paper in just a second. But this exercise is called. In fact, I didn't really give it a name. Head and shoulders. Let's call it head and shoulders. Take 2 bottles into the shower. I like to wash my hair and go, if you remember that advert, which you may well do. Okay, let me switch to my other camera. Let's see if I can remember how to do this. Right. Let me just make that a little bit bigger. So hopefully you can see my screen there. And I'm using a little free program called Visualizer that goes along with it, and that just allows you to see what I'm drawing. And I'll do what a decent pen makes a big difference too. It took me a while to figure that out, but I tend to either use this sort of a uniball, which sort of has a good flow to it, or a marker, I suppose, like this, which I'll use today because it's a wee bit easier to see. Or there's these things that are sort of used in sort of manga comics quite a lot. They're sort of brush pens, and they're sort of halfway between a brush and a pen. I find them really useful as well. But anyway, the exercise we're going to do is just to draw a little face and to add a speech bubble to it. Okay, so now when you're drawing my face, it's really easy because I'm basically just, let's see, a circle, and a triangle. I've got a big nose, and here's a couple of eyes here, and some ears. I definitely have ears, and a mouth, and that's pretty much me. I've little mistake. Looks like I'm dribbling a little bit there. Never mind. But I find this so let's put a speech bubble next to me. Sort of, so hey. There is a little speech bubble. I find that really useful just to add in, because it almost, even though it's a very basic drawing of a person, it makes whatever you're trying to illustrate just a little bit more personable, because suddenly there's a person saying something. Maybe there's let's see if we can just get a little response. So here's one of the weird things about doing this webinar is there's no interaction, so I can't tell whether people are bored or whether they're enjoying this or anything. So let's sort of draw someone. Let's give them hair this time. Well, I find hair overrated, to be honest. So maybe they're saying something. Again, I'm just using the same thing, just a little circle for the head. Drawing in the nose, and then I'm thinking about where are the eyes, and what's this person saying? Where's the mouth? And what's useful about this as well is that it means you don't have to draw any hands. Hands are a nightmare to draw. But I'll pretend like I know what I'm doing here. And usually, if you sort of draw them like a bit of a shovel, And again, if stuff doesn't look quite right, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Maybe, and we think about what this person's saying, in response to, hey, how's it going? Maybe they're saying, oh, has it actually started? I don't know. Anyway, just drawing a little, and you'll find actually that if you start to think about just how many different faces can you draw, and what sort of expressions you can add. So here's somebody sort of saying something, maybe they're being a little bit, eyebrows raised, a little bit arrogant. Oh, I don't know what they're saying. Maybe they're saying, I am creative. And I think that's a really great place to start in terms of, just adding a few things and just taking a photograph of that and adding it into your, whether it be a presentation or your materials or whatever else. There's some things that will really help you sort of professionalize what you've drawn. I have again, there's a link I'll add to the end, but I use an app called Carbo, which I think is only available for iOS, but there's other sort of scanning apps that you can use that will just make it black and white. So we'll take away the sort of the various gradients of the background, and we'll make it look like a sort of a scanned in, or just a really quick scanned in image, but actually with a little bit of professionalism in there too. And of course, you should always sign your work. So let me just sign my work here. Brian M. Mellors, right. So that's something that you can practice and have a go at, and yeah, and see how your characters come out. And I guarantee you that if you keep doing a few and start adding them in, they will evolve. They will get better. Right. Secondly, I'm just going to flip this over, and the other thing I wanted to do was to talk about mind maps, because I use mind maps all the time. I use them to think, but often that's where my ideas come from. Right. So I often do live drawing as well with other people. So maybe I'm connected to a big screen and I'm facilitating a conversation, and then I'm filtering that conversation and drawing as I go, and it's quite intensive, but also it's a good way of sort of capturing a landscape of conversation, which is very different from just words disappearing into the ether, I find. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, let's just do a really quick mind map. And I was thinking yesterday, what will I do? I was thinking, well, I usually start off with something in the middle. What are the things that have been giving me hope in these odd times that we find ourselves in? Well, one thing is I'm doing lots of running. So doing running with the kids every other day. So, again, really basic, and you can start to, just sort of do work. There's a real trick, by the way, I discovered, took me ages to discover it, but if you do something in pencil and then go over it in pen and then rub out the pencil, you get two cracks at one drawing. And who doesn't want that? So, so let's add in running. And running makes me feel good. So I've been able to do lots more running with again, because kids need exercise, the other thing that's given me hope is, having time for conversations. So I know they're sort of 2 meter apart conversations, but somehow they're more meaningful whenever because you really are asking how somebody is. You're saying, hey, how is it? How are you finding it? And somebody will tell you a story, and you know, so it's the yeah, conversations. And my as it said, my youngest is doing lots about Romans these days, and so he's made a Roman shield with various different can't remember what they're called actually, the sort of symbols on the shield. And here's his you know And yeah, there's something different about sort of time with the kids. Sometimes it's quite strained, you know, but sometimes it really is great. And I see time with kids. Right, how we doing? And yeah, that's a bit of bird song. I'm lucky enough to have a garden, and I've been sort of sneaking into it at you know, early morning and just sort of listening, just saying hello to the day, and you know, listening to some of the beautiful bird song. Um, and yeah, you know, living in London as I am as well, it's just the sort of the clean air. Goodness me, London's never had it so good in terms of the. Just seems to be no airplanes, and we've had this lovely weather. But this, you could really notice the. Let's see, there's some Paul's little. There's the gherkin. But just by sort of thinking, well, just what next, and I can just keep going and sort of adding bits and pieces to. Let's see if I can actually zoom out here and give you a better picture of how this is evolving. Hopefully you can see some of that. But it's just it's a different way of thinking. And obviously, as you start to ask yourself, what does that look like? Conversations, what does that look like? Two people talking, you know, bird song, what does it look like? And sometimes it means you have to go to Google Images and go, what does a bird look like again? Because I've drawn the beak in the wrong place and it looks all wrong. That's okay. Um, excuse me. So there's two exercises to experiment with, really. Let me just jump back to my slides. If I can figure out how to do that. Here we are. Good. So we did that, and we talked about mind maps, which I use all the time. And sometimes, yeah, you can create things and uh, sometimes have a second pass at it to sort of create a tidier version of your thinking. And you've created a visual, a perfectly good visual that sort of explores sort of you know, various different visual elements related to the topic that you're trying to get across. Um, and then just finally, just wrapping up here before we sort of go for some questions. I'm sure that maybe you're wondering what sort of tools does this guy use? And there's a real trap here. I'll tell you what tools I use, but there's a real trap, and that's to think that technology will suddenly turn you into a great artist, right? And so technology can certainly help, and I'll explain some of how that can happen. But that's basically like saying, if I buy a piano, then I will be a great pianist. Well, of course, a piano is essential to becoming a great pianist, but it's back to practicing and actually just having a go and getting over yourself and then finding enjoyment in there. I think is quite an important thing. Anyway, here's some of the tools that I use all the time. So I've mentioned Carbo on my phone, taking photographs just on my smartphone. Um, I do use an iPad a lot. So I use an Apple Pencil and an iPad. And the iPad was really important in my journey because using a free app called Paper, which is where my journey began really with drawing, I figured out that you could draw something, it wasn't quite right, undo, draw that bit again, wasn't right, draw that bit again, that'll do. And so you got as many bites of the cherry as you wanted. Whereas paper is a lot less forgiving when it comes to drawing. But the odd thing is that by learning to draw on the iPad, I then discovered a love for drawing on paper. Somehow it allowed me to get over a barrier with myself that then became something that I always think on paper now. You know what I mean? I use sketchbooks all the time. So a sketchbook is a really important part because, especially if you're thinking of coming up with materials, you'll have ideas at various different times. You know what I mean? Oh, maybe I could, because your brain's always working on stuff. that you're working on. But it's why you have good ideas in the shower, because your brain and your subconscious is still processing stuff, and there's why can't I do it like that? And so you need to have stuff around to be able to sort of capture those ideas. So sketchbook's really important to me. And then a computer, obviously we all use computers probably, but there's a few apps there. In the beginning of my journey, I didn't use the Adobe products. You know, they were too complicated. They felt very daunting. They felt like you needed a degree to use them. And I used a lot simpler ones. So in particular, Pixelmator. It was really useful to me, and iDraw as well, just in terms of drawing things and then starting to put them together, which allows you to sort of keep moving them apart. I find really, really useful. But I outgrew those programs, and therefore now use Photoshop and Illustrator quite a lot. And of course, my document camera, that has been really a discovery. I saw it at a client of mine's, and just thought, I'm gonna get myself one of those. But of course, it's so compatible with doing a Zoom meeting, you know what I mean, and you capturing that dialogue. So again, I use that all the time. And then again, the links, the slides will be available to download. But I've added all the links here to various stock photography sites, and then GIFs, a meme generator if you want to generate your own memes. And then Creative Commons and Carbo I mentioned. Skillshare I will also just point towards, because Skillshare is something I subscribe to. I think it's about sort of 50 or 60 pounds a year. But on there's lots of little courses sort of where people are taking you through learning a new skill. And there's actually all sorts of stuff in there, but quite a lot of sort of design and illustration, or things like how to make your own GIF, but lots of programming as well, and social media and all sorts. So if that's your sort of, if that butters your parsnips, then I would suggest that you check that out too. And that's it. That's the end of this of my presentation anyway. We've got about 10 minutes left, I think, if my timing is correct, for questions. And I think I think Faye is going to be maybe asking some of those questions. So if you have any questions and you haven't yet put them in the question panel, now's the time to get them in there. And I'll see if I can answer a few of them before the webinar finishes. So yes.
Brian, it's great. I'm going to hand over to Manjinder, who will be going through the questions with you, and then she'll sign off the presentation at the end. But for the moment, I'll pass over to Manjinder, and she will forward everyone's questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Faye.
Hiya, Brian. How are you doing? That is fabulous. I really enjoyed that. I love doing a bit of drawing myself as well. I might actually try that with my little girl later on as well. It's really, really good.
Good.
We've got a couple of questions coming in, so just bear with me while I scroll through. The first one was from Stephen, I record. What would you do if you had Creative Commons on something and you came across somebody using it without acknowledgement or even adding their stamp on it?
So this has happened to me quite a few times, and it's a tricky situation. I remember something got picked up by the New European magazine, and it was essentially something I had created that then someone changed ever so slightly and then shared on Twitter without any reference to me. And I just sent a message to New European and said, actually, I'm the creator of that. And I got an apology from both the person that changed it and from New European. And that they tried to obviously to recognize the fact that I was the original creator of that. Yeah, I've had a few other instances of that happening. But on the whole, people do treat artwork that other people have created well. So those would be the minority really that don't use it properly. And mostly it's a point of ignorance, really. You know what I mean? If you don't know what Creative Commons is, And if you think that it's okay to just go on the web and take an image and use it, then to that person, they're not committing a crime at all. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's fair game. So I think so I've sort of reconciled with myself. One, part of my job is to educate and to sort of say, hey, Creative Commons is free to use. You know what I mean? It's actually a really great set of licenses that is always getting better. And as a creator, I've got to spread the good news of that. And that actually most people will take that seriously. And in fact, even if there is a Creative Commons license on something, a lot of people will still get in touch with you to say, is it okay if I use that? Because people are like that, as in they like to just be courteous. And of course, I love it when people do that, because I get to really know that it's of value to someone, and that makes my heart warm. So.
Yeah, I think there's a really important point that you made there. A lot of the time, people don't know that they're it's available on the net. It's like almost like public property sometimes. Okay, next question. Do you think it's best to scan an image once drawn and put it into PowerPoint, or is there a better way? So is it best to scan an image once drawn and then put it into PowerPoint, or is there an alternative? I think obviously people are trying to relate this to training that they're trying to digitize and try and make more interesting.
Okay, so I think you've got a number of options here, and it's worth doing some experimentation. Okay, I would say the lowest common denominator is taking a photo with your phone. Okay, that might look a little bit crude, but in my book, a visual is better than no visual. Okay, so I think that's your starter for 10. Taking that further, most smartphones these days will have the ability for you to touch up your image. You know, so if you start experimenting with both brightness and contrast, you'll find that you can actually make the black blacker and the white whiter. Okay, and that will allow you to create something that looks a little bit more scanned, a little bit more professional. Okay, another option is to actually use a scanner. It's a little bit slower, but again, I know many artists who use scanners. That's how they do it. They'll ink on paper, and then they'll scan it in, and they'll manipulate it then on Photoshop, or just put it straight into something. And then the fourth option being if you do have an Apple device, then Carbo I highly recommend, and that's what I tend to use all the time. It will give you, what I like about it is it gives you a transparent image. So it makes the black black, but the white gets turned into transparent, and that means that it's a lot more of a flexible image to use. So essentially you've got options, and actually there's probably other options that I don't know about in terms of other apps that will also do that sort of scanning function and allow you to beautify a photo essentially.
Yeah. And does Carbo, so does it work very similar to a scanner, or are you just taking a picture and then it's manipulating it within the system?
Yeah, it's super really, in that it's essentially taking a slow photo, right? So it sort of takes a sort of multiple photos at the same time, and then figures out what's the dark areas and what's the light areas, and it gets rid of the light areas and keeps the dark areas, and then just essentially allows you to either sort of send that to yourself by AirDrop if you've got a Mac, or if not, you can save it to Google Drive or save it to your phone, and then just sort of transfer the photo from your phone. So it's definitely worth having a look at. I think it's about £7 or £8 in terms of an app, but I've used it for a number of years now consistently. As a way of sort of getting black and white images into like a slide deck.
Excellent. So we've got another question from Simon. Do you use animation?
Well, you see, this is part of the journey. As soon as you start drawing stuff, then you think, can I make this come to life? And the answer is I do. So I'm really driven by my own curiosity. I have sort of taught myself After Effects, which is, again, it's a pretty serious piece of kit. An Adobe software that allows you to move stuff, to create animations from the things that you have drawn. There's other Adobe products as well that allows you to what's called create puppet pins. So you can draw something, and then you can, so say you draw a figure with sort of 2 arms and leg, or 2 arms and leg, 2 arms and 2 legs, but you can sort of, you can turn their head, or you can, and it's really clever at how you can then bring something to life. But actually there's lots of lo-fi ways that you can also add a little bit of movement. So the app that I use on the iPad when I'm drawing is called Procreate, and it's, look, you know, Grace and Perry will use the same app. It's it's sort of taken over as the standard. If you're drawing on an iPad, it's a standard app that people are using, and it's recently added onion skinning. If you know what onion skinning is, so the ability to create lots of different frames, and then sort of play those frames fast. So, and it's just giving you a few tools to be able to create those really nicely. So you can do things like, right, this image, hold for half a second, and then transition, and you just draw a few different variations, but you can see what the last variation was and draw over it. And so you can sort of, and speed it up. It looks great. It looks great. It takes a long time. So usually somebody needs to be paying me to be doing that for them, because it takes quite a bit of time. Whereas a lot of the stuff I put out for other people to use under Creative Commons license, yeah, is things I've created that are just quick. I've tried to capture them quickly because I'm doing them in between other jobs, really. But yeah, absolutely, bring them to life.
Excellent. So we've got another question from Martin. At what point do you know that your drawings are good enough to include in a presentation? He said he loves the concept, but he's worried about his ability.
Martin, well, that's the golden question. How best to answer that? I would just do it anyway, right? Because you've got to start somewhere, and I think you'll be surprised at, you're always going to talk yourself down, I think, rather than talking yourself up. At least if you're like me, that's definitely part of me. So even things I create now, there's a little, I could almost draw a little graph where I get excited about something, I create something, I'm in the moment where I'm sort of making that come to life, and I go, yeah, there it is, that's it. And then if I don't share it, I almost sort of fall out of love with it a little bit. And maybe by the next day I look at it and go, yeah, maybe that's not as good as I thought it was. And then you know, maybe and I move on and I don't share it. And I've tried to get into the habit of create something, get it out there. Don't think about it, get it out there, because you'll talk yourself out of it rather than talking yourself into it. So my encouragement to you, Martin,
I can agree with you there, Brian. I definitely agree with you there. You'll always talk yourself out of doing things, and I think that's the same with all type of content as well. You know, you can sort of say, oh well, it's not quite ready, or it's not quite perfect. But yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay, we've got one more.
Sorry, just to add to that, you know, even if you talk to very accomplished artists, they'll still be wrestling with that. You know what I mean? They'll still be sort of saying to themselves, you know, is it good enough? And there's this saying that sort of says, you know, art is only ever abandoned. It's never finished. And I find that's quite helpful. It's true. At a point, you've got to draw the line, go, do you want? It's good enough. It's got to go, and I'm not gonna worry about it too much. And if people don't like it, they start throwing things at me, that's their problem. But it doesn't happen. People don't throw stuff at you.
Yeah. Okay, so last question. How do you know if you can use others' images with reference to them, and when it is copyrighted? So I think the question is from Laura. How do you know if you got permission to use other images, and if you are going to use them, how do you reference them?
Okay, well, I'll answer that in 2 parts. So first part is, if you go to a stock photography website like Pixabay, I think, or Unsplash, then it'll be clear that it's just like, you can use this image, and you'll see a prompt saying you should really credit the author or the illustrator for this image, or the photographer for this image. Okay. If you use a search, so if you use Google Search, so Google Search actually has a feature in the settings of the search. So it's not the advanced search, but in the settings of the search, you can say, you can show me openly licensed images, and it will only give you back sort of images that are openly licensed. Okay, but the bottom line is sometimes it's hard to tell whether you can use an image or not. But that's the whole point of Creative Commons, where you'll see a little CC at the bottom of an image. So let me see if I can just switch to, oh, let's see.
Slightly over time, guys, as well, but just please bear with us. We'll wrap up in a few minutes.
So if I'm just going to show an image from my site here. Can you see that? I hope that you can. Right. So down at the bottom of my site, you'll see this CC. So just right down at the bottom of it, there's a little CC, and that's basically saying you can use this image under a Creative Commons license. So if you see that anywhere, even if someone else was to use this image and they put in the CC, it means that you can use the image that they're sharing, even though they didn't create it. But it's almost sort of saying that it's the opposite of copyright, copyleft, I suppose. You know, and it's basically saying that, look, there are rights attached to this, but it's open for you to use in a different way to copyright.
Perfect. Right, we're going to wrap up now then. Honestly, Brian, that's just been riveting stuff. I think it's really, really useful and can be used in so many different contexts. Thank you everybody for attending. We do have a repeat of this webinar. It will be a live webinar. We will record. This one is recorded and it will be sent out to you. But we will be repeating it on the 12th at 2:30 p.m. So if you want to join us, or somebody else out of your team wants to join us, do register for that. And then the one next Thursday is on how to use design thinking to improve the appeal of your learning product or service, and that is with Chris Bard on the 14th of May at 10 a.m. and again we'll have another repeat of that. I would like to just very quickly ask you to go and sign up to our newsletter so that we can contact you again about the further resources and any of the funding that we might be putting into place. So if you want to stay in touch with us and you want us to tell you about, you know, excellent resources like today's webinar and other resources, do sign up on our newsletter on the UFI page through contact. Thank you, Brian, and thank you everyone for listening. Okay, goodbye.
Okay, thank you.